Speaker. I beg to move that this House has considered the situation in Ukraine. 7 days ago, President Zelensky inspired us with his address to Parliament. This weekend, he was visiting wounded soldiers in hospital, leading from the front. And we owe it to President Zelensky and to the people of Ukraine to do our utmost to help them in their brave fight. We owe it to ourselves to stand up for security and stability in Europe, and we owe it to the world to keep the flame of freedom burning and to show that aggression does not pay. In response to the unprovoked attack, the world has shown immense unity in standing up to Vladimir Putin, but we need to keep up the pressure. Madam Deputy Speaker, our objective is clear. Putin must lose in Ukraine. We are doing this by cutting off the funding for his war machine, by providing weapons that the Ukrainians need to defend themselves, and isolating Putin on the world stage. The United Kingdom has been at the forefront of international response with a tough sanction package and strong support, including defensive weapons and humanitarian aid. Now, we will enhance our work with allies to respond to Russia's aggression. We need to be strong to get peace. That is why we are building on efforts to cut off the funding for Putin's war machine through sanctions. And today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can announce we will go further than ever before by hitting over 360 more people complicit with Putin's regime. They range from former President Dmitry Medvedev and Defence Minister Sergei Shoigu to Putin's propagandist Maria Zakharova. This means after today we will have designated over 1,000 individuals and entities under our Russian sanctions regime. And we are using our new powers under the Economic Crime Act to maximise that impact. This would not have been possible without the extraordinary efforts of colleagues across this Parliament to help get this legislation through the House so quickly. And it shows our collective determination to lead by example in punishing the Putin regime. In December, He's
right that we're sanctioning a lot of people, but in actual fact, we name the people who are sanctioned, and it's other people that then do the sanctioning by not engaging with them on a financial basis, not buying or selling properties and all the rest of it. One of the difficulties at the moment is that it's phenomenally difficult to find out on the Foreign Office sanctions list who is and isn't sanctioned. So, for instance, the members of the Duma, who I gather it was announced last week were sanctioned, they're still not on the Foreign Office website list, so far as I can see anyway. So I just wonder whether there's a way of making this far more readily available to the wider population, because we need to deal not just with the people who have £20 million houses that we've all heard of, but the people who've got £750,000 flats in London, bought with Russian dirty money, the many relatives, for instance, of Abramovich and his ex-partners. Each one of those needs to be dealt with, and each one of those properties needs to be seized.
The honourable gentleman makes an important point about ensuring that we give due publicity to the people, institutions and entities that have been sanctioned. And I'll ensure that the suggestion that he has made is listened to by the Department. In December, we brought our G7 partners together in Liverpool to warn Putin that invading Ukraine would have massive consequences. And indeed, we have followed through on that pledge. We have worked with our allies to cut off sectors of the Russian economy by targeting its defence companies, its trade and transport sector, and kicking banks out of the SWIFT financial system. We have led the way in our financial sanctions, targeting 10 Russian banks, and we have hit over £300 billion worth of Russian bank assets. All this amounts to the toughest sanctions package of any country. And we will work with and encourage all our allies to keep ratcheting up their efforts as well. We will continue to provide lethal military aid to Ukraine. We were the first European country to send defensive weapons, and we have already donated over 3,600 NLAW anti-tank weapons and are also now supplying Javelin missiles.
Most grateful, my honourable friend, for giving way. Would you not agree with me that one of the light moments, an otherwise extremely bleak military picture in Ukraine, was the destruction of Russian tanks using, one has to presume, British NLAW missiles?
My honourable and gallant friend makes, I think, a very important point, and we have heard anecdotally that Ukrainians are shouting "God save the Queen" as they are firing those weapons at the tanks that have been sent to destroy them. And I am very, very proud that we play an incredibly important part. I will give way.
Madam Speaker, I thank the Minister for giving way. It's very courteous of him. Is it not true, however, that part of the reason that we are where we are today is the historic long-term rundown of our armed forces? And this situation today sits very ill with the proposal to reduce the British Army by 10,000 men and women. And finally, we've all read in today's Telegraph that inflation will in fact reduce the size of the armed forces over the years ahead.
Well, the sad truth, I think, is that Vladimir Putin has been plotting this expansionist idea of his for quite some time, and I don't agree that it's necessarily linked with domestic defence policy here in the UK, but I think we can be absolutely proud of the fact that it is British military technology, assisted by British military training, that is helping the Ukrainians in their time of need and in their ferocious defence of their homeland. I'll give way one more time and then I'll...
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He has shared with the House how the United Kingdom has taken the lead on our continent in terms of freezing the assets of Russians. In his discussions with the European Union, have they been able to furnish my right honourable friend with an explanation as to why they, as an entity, have failed to keep up the pace with Britain in terms of those asset freezes?
I am often encouraged to do a compare and contrast between the UK and our international friends and partners. The simple truth is that there has been greater, tighter and closer coordination in response to Putin's aggression in Ukraine than I could have ever imagined. We will continue to work incredibly closely. We are very proud of the fact that as the UK, we have had such a dramatic and detrimental impact on Russia's finances, choking off Putin's ability to fund his aggression. We intend to go further, and we will do so in close coordination with our international friends and partners. I will give way to my...
The member for giving way. As someone who lost his guts quite a few times his lunch from helicopters having to jink because of the threat of Stinger missiles given to our allies at the time, decades before, can the Minister assure us that the government is putting in place sufficient measures to make sure that our weapons do not end up on the black market in the hands of the wrong people at a future day, and also to tell us that our weapons, the NLAWs and other pieces of hostile aggressive equipment are not going to end up in the hands of far-right neo-Nazis, many of which we know are making their way to Ukraine now from around the world?
Our priority and the defensive weapons support that we have provided is to help the Ukrainians defend themselves against the attacks of Russia. Obviously, we hope that this conflict comes to a swift conclusion, but until then, we will be continuing our support for the Ukrainians as they defend themselves, and of course, what happens at the end of this conflict in terms of securing munitions will be something, of course, we will work with the Ukrainian government and our international friends and partners. But at the moment, our priority, quite rightly, is to help the Ukrainians defend themselves against Putin's attack. I will, and then I'll make...
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Can I just ask him about this distinction between supplying defensive as opposed to offensive weaponry? The fact is that in a situation where a friendly nation finds itself under attack, all weaponry with which we supply them is defensive. And I would have thought that if we cannot intervene ourselves, and there are good reasons why we cannot, there is no reason at all why we cannot help them with their airspace problem by facilitating the necessary aircraft deliveries which they have requested.
Yeah.
My right honourable friend makes an incredibly important point about munition systems being inherently defensive when you are under attack. He makes a very important point about airspace management, and actually that's something I will come on to later on in my remarks. I intend to make some progress now. Since 2014, we have worked to train over 22,000 Ukrainian troops under Operation Orbital, and as well as helping Ukraine defend itself from attack on the ground, we must also help them defend themselves against attack from the skies. That's why we will be sending more supplies, including Starstreak ground-based air defence, anti-aircraft missiles, and we and our allies need to do everything possible within the UN Charter on Self-Defence to help Ukraine defend itself. That's why I was with my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, this morning, discussing with and working with our Nordic and Baltic allies to increase defensive support as part of the UK-led Joint Expeditionary Force. And we must be robust in supporting our NATO allies living under the shadow of Russian aggression. So the UK, as NATO's biggest European contributor, is doubling the number of troops in Estonia and Poland. As Putin inflicts ever greater misery in Ukraine, we continue our humanitarian and economic support. We have pledged almost £400 million, and this includes supplying over 700,000 medical items directly to Ukraine and more than 500 power generators to keep essential facilities like hospitals running. We have also brought over 21 critically ill Ukrainian children to receive life-saving cancer treatment here in the UK, and we are providing the most humanitarian aid of any European country. The British people, Madam Deputy Speaker, have also risen to the moment by showing their own huge generosity of spirit. In a short time since it was launched, there have been over 80,000 people sign up for our Homes for Ukraine scheme. I will give way.
Most grateful, my honourable friend, and it may just help him to know there's just been a Sky News flash, and it's now over 100,000.
It's lovely. It's never usually nice to be wrong at the dispatch box, but I'm incredibly proud that the figure that I quoted, which was accurate at the time the speech was written a few hours ago, has now been made obsolete once again by the enormous generosity of spirit of the British people, and I think it shows us at our best. The Disasters Emergency Committee's appeal has now reached over £150 million, which we are supporting with our largest ever match funding pledge of £25 million. I will give way.
I don't doubt the generosity of the people in this country, but I am still worried about the generosity of this government. And can I give him an example? A young Ukrainian family related to one of my constituents has thankfully made it into Poland. They had their visa appointment a week ago, but they're still waiting for the outcome of the decision. Over 1 week just to wait to hear what the outcome of the decision is. While their hotel bills are rising, they're considering even to go back to the Ukraine, into a war zone. How humane is that response from the government? Can they not make these decisions much more quickly?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, other members of the government have made it clear that our intention is to be generous and welcome Ukrainians with open arms. We are looking to facilitate that as quickly as possible, and the Home Secretary has spoken at the dispatch box about things that she has put in place to facilitate that. If she will pass on the details of those people, we will see what we can do to facilitate that. But I can assure her that the generosity of spirit of this country will be felt by the Ukrainians fleeing the persecution and attack by Vladimir Putin. As well as supporting Ukraine directly, we are also deploying our diplomatic efforts internationally. We are rallying the 141 countries that voted to condemn Russia's actions at the UN to do even more still. We have seen many of those countries support our sanctions worldwide, from Switzerland to Singapore, and we're working to draw more countries into the orbit of those who are prepared to stand up for the sovereignty of Ukraine. We are working with partners to reduce the economic dependency on Russia across the world, from the Indo-Pacific to Africa and the Gulf, through trade and the British international investment. Everything we do will further isolate the Putin regime, which has made Russia a global pariah. And ultimately, we will hold Putin accountable for his crimes. We will work with prosecutors at the ICC to help them get the information that they need, and we will not relent in our mission to see that justice is done. I will give.
Has my right honourable friend seen the most recent reports that the Russian Navy is now massing off Odessa in a typical Russian tactical manoeuvre to open a new front? And is this not, in fact, a new opportunity to demonstrate to the world the unacceptability of Putin's disgusting war and to bring open and international condemnation for his actions?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right that we need to continue working internationally to enhance the coalition of nations who have denounced Putin's actions, to increase the pressure on him to bring this war to a conclusion, rather than open up another front and increase the suffering for the people in Ukraine. We must be realistic that there will be a cost to the UK and to our allies by imposing these tough sanctions. But the cost of doing nothing is so much higher. We saw what happened in 2014 when the free world did not do enough to contain Putin's aggression. He came back more aggressively. That's why we cannot allow Putin to impose a settlement on to Ukraine which vindicates his aggression. If we fail to stand up to Putin, if we fail to support Ukraine in their hour of need, we will live to regret it. That is why I will give way.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. We know what a successful sanctions regime looks like. Putin withdraws, peace restored, etc. When and who determines whether the sanctions policy hasn't worked, and what's the next step thereafter?
My honourable friend is right to draw our attention to that. The simple truth is that these sanctions have to be successful, and we have to keep applying the pressure until they are successful. I will give way, then I need to conclude.
I do thank him. On that point, as we mount up the sanctions, we will be freezing more and more oligarchs or Russian assets, but we won't be selling them. We're not sequestrating them. So we're going to end up with a pile of assets. Are we at some point going to use those assets for the better of the Ukrainian people, or are we going to just wait till the war's over and hand them back, which I don't think would be as popular?
Ultimately, what we are looking to do with these sanctions is to choke off the funding let me answer this one. To choke off the supply of funds for Putin's war machine. We have to be very, very focused on what these sanctions are for. This is about bringing this conflict to a conclusion. I will take the honourable gentleman's intervention and then I will...
I thank the Minister for his most generous to give his time. Just a single point on sanctions. What action will we take when there are people who will break those sanctions with Russia and take supplies, particularly at the moment the crude oil that has been taken by India? What action should we take in those circumstances? The people are still supporting Putin with his money flowing into the country.
Well, ultimately, the enforcement of our sanctions regime is a task for HM Treasury, who will, of course, work across government and internationally to ensure that the sanctions packages are robust and they have the desired effect of ending this war in Ukraine. That is why the UK is working so hard. That is why, together with our allies and partners, we will ensure that Putin loses in Ukraine.
The question is that this House has considered Ukraine. Shadow